Okay, thank you guys. My name is Shane Murphy. Thank you for being with us. So this evening we're going to be keeping an eye on the other screen here. So if there's any messages come into me, I'll see them. So we're going to be covering home energy upgrades. We do this talk every Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock. We're going to be starting in the next week or so a solar webinar as a standalone. We'll be covering some of it this evening, but today is mainly about kind of your upgrade options. Of course, solar is one of those, and we'll be covering it in a small amount of detail. So, good. We've been asked about these webinars for quite a while. We appreciate that there's a lot of confusion in our industry, I suppose, surrounding your upgrades, and the recent, less recent now, I suppose, these SEI upgrade grants that were released in February, and then of course over the next months, the detail has made its way out, and of course now the public are struggling a little bit to find all the information in one place. So we've been asked to do this, so we've been doing it for probably the last 4 or 5 months now for the home upgrades, but for other stuff we've been doing it for the last nearly 10 years. So I'll tell you what we're covering this evening. We're going to do a quick introduction to SAI and a little bit about Ashgrove. I won't bore you with Ashgrove and how fantastic we are. You don't care, I'm sure. We'll talk about the grant types and the criteria. We'll talk about the administration process. We'll talk about the technical details of the upgrades, the various upgrades. We'll talk about a few case studies, and we'll talk about maybe funding options. And then if you guys wanted to ask any questions, if you wanted to type them in there to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, I'll keep an eye on it. And if I'll answer questions at the relevant spot, if it's the right thing to do. If it's not, I'll keep going and I'll answer it at the end. So, but if you could throw me in the questions as early as possible, if you had anything in particular, and I'll try and deal with it. So, good, keep going. So you'll all be aware of, I suppose, SEI's mission is to assist through incentives or regulation the transition to our low carbon future over the next 3 decades. So what we're talking about this evening is the incentive side of it. If you're on here and you're interested in regulation, you're probably in a new build market, you're probably on the wrong webinar. But obviously SEI have a major housing or a major focus on the housing stock. And that's certainly what we're talking about this evening. We're not going to be talking about commercial or industrial projects, even though as a company we do them, but we won't be discussing these this evening. And we'll be talking about the individual measures. And a measure, of course, is anything you can do to your house. So changing windows would be considered a measure. Putting in a heat pump would be considered a measure. So we'll be talking a lot about measures. So it's important that you understand the term. So we'll be talking about individual measures or multiple measures, and so we'll talk about the where you might use either shortly. So we know that we have to, or the target is 500,000 homes by 2030. In order to reach this target, they've significantly increased the grants this year, and many people are aware that there are grants in place, but to find the relevant ones seems to be a major challenge. And of course, that's why we're here. So a little bit about Ashgrove. We're in business since 2001. We've been working with SAI on upgrades since 2006. We have about actually 15,000 systems in operation now. Probably the slide needs updating. We did about 1,000 systems last year. It'll be greater than that this year. And you can see there that, you know, on any project we do kind of a full design element at the start, then we install. Of course, everything that is grant related has a heavy emphasis on quality. So we do the quality assurance. everything has to be certified. So the likes of solar or heat pumps or any of this, there's electrical certs, Reiki certs, which have to go with it. And of course, then you're into handing it over and training the customer. And then of course, you're beginning a kind of a 20-25 year life with the management or operation of your new system. So, and probably question I get asked certainly 20 times a day, who does the paperwork? So in most of these projects, we do all of the paperwork. So if it's a one-stop shop or a BEC type grant, we do the paperwork. We have to do it. In the BEH, which is an individual measure grant, so if you decided you wanted to do solar panels or attic insulation, your best bet would be to go through an individual measure grant. And in that case, you're supposed to do, you have to do the paperwork. Now, that said, we do it with you. We have videos now explaining here is how you fill out the paperwork. But the last bit, of course, that goes on to it is your bank details, so that the grant will land back into your bank account. So for that reason, you're supposed to do it. But it's I have to say it's a painless exercise, especially when you're able to watch a video on your phone that we would WhatsApp or email to you, and it's painless enough. So as I said, questions, if you fire them into me as we go, I'm keeping an eye. So the benefits of a home energy upgrade are obvious enough, I would guess. I'm assuming all of you can read the screen here, guys, but if anybody's looking at this on a phone or something, you can prompt me to zoom in, and I can do so, but I'll plow on until I hear otherwise. So obviously, the benefit of your home energy upgrade is to reduce your energy costs. You'll have a warmer, healthier home, more environmentally friendly. You achieve a BER of a B2 or better. That's only true actually for the multiple measure heat pumps, so our multiple measure upgrades. And we'd say if you're getting an individual measure, say an attic insulation upgrade or something like that, you don't necessarily have to hit the B2. But anyway, we'll come to that as we go, but in general, it's probably true. I would say for 90% of the projects we're doing, you'd be at a B2 or better. It'll increase the value of your home. We know from a recent report that in Dublin, if your house goes from a D1 to a B1, you're increasing the value of your home by, believe it or not, 16%. And if you're outside of Dublin, that's 12%. So, I mean, that's quite, 15 years ago when the BERs originally came out, nobody really placed any value on it. Whereas now today, there's a very real value on it. We understand that, a B2 or a B1 or an A3 represents, I suppose, something like miles per gallon for your car. It's a very real figure, whereas 15 years ago, it really didn't mean anything. So it's beginning to really have an effect. So better air quality in an upgraded home, typically. It's important to monitor moisture and stuff like this. We'll talk about the impact as we go forward. It's important that you don't insulate or seal a house too well, because you'll end up with too much moisture or poor air quality. And Ireland has the third highest rate of asthma in the world. I know some of that has to do with our relative humidity, etc., but also we have a poor emphasis on ventilation, and so it should be worth keeping in mind. Green mortgages. The green mortgages, we see a major influx of queries surrounding the green mortgages. If you can get your house to a B3, you can get your mortgage rate reduced by up to, the highest we've seen is 0.9%, but I'd say in general it's probably 0.4 or 0.5. Either way, it all helps. Lastly, you can get these low interest rate green loans. So if you're just doing an upgrade to your home, you can avail of these low interest rate loans. Now the government had talked about coming out in Q3, which of course has come and gone. And they were talking about a government kind of loan being administered through the banks, but that it would be somewhere around 3%, which of course we'd all be delighted with. Either way, we haven't seen it, so and we probably won't hold our breaths. Okay, so I'll give you the dime tour. as the Americans would say, about ash growth. I won't bore you with the detail here. This is slides from another presentation, but we do everything from small houses up to very large houses. You can see these top ones here on the island of Jersey. The next one in the middle is a large house in London, high-end, all of these kind of indoor pools, outdoor pools, jacuzzis, heating and cooling. One of them has a heated yard so they don't get ice. And one of them, in bottom one there, is in Dublin. It's a it's in Munster, 55,000 square foot house, so very high end. We also do residential. We've done this in Reading in the UK. That was probably done up until it finished about probably 2 or 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I'm guessing now. Full mechanical contract, kind of £2 million projects, doing combined heat and power plants where we produce electricity from gas engines, air-to-air systems, fire sprinkler, ventilation, plumbing, heating, etc. And then we also build very large heat pumps where we recover energy maybe from lakes or from a process. So if a process was dumping heat out the end of a factory through a refrigeration plant or something like that, we would recover that energy through heat pumps. And you can see here, we're talking about 2 kilowatts, or sorry, 2,000 kilowatts, apologies. 2 kilowatts is about the smallest unit we would do for a domestic unit for maybe an apartment, right up to 2,000 kilowatts. These are typically in the UK. We don't have, well, it's partly down to grants, I'd have to be honest. We don't have grants that kind of help the installation of these projects in Ireland. So anyway, I won't bore you with any more. So that's kind of it. The only reason I'm showing you those, by the way, other than showing off a little bit, is to say we have a strong team of project managers. We're a technical bunch. I mean, half of the guys here are coming from an energy background, so mechanical, ventilation, sustainability, and so on. My background is building services, which is heating, ventilation, air conditioning, lighting, and acoustics, and so on. And so that's all. And of course, with any of these projects, it goes without saying that there's a strong emphasis on QA, so quality assurance. And I suppose the point at the end of all of that being further is that all of these characteristics are of benefit to you. So presumably in your house, I don't know where all of you are coming in from, but anyway. So the reason we started doing these seminars, I suppose, is we were getting clients coming up to us at shows or contacting our office, and they knew that there was SEI had grants. They knew that they could get it for solar panels or something to do with insulation or whatever it was. But it was in most cases people came in with no information in some of the cases, of course, no information is better than bad information. And a lot of people came in with bad information. They had already maybe gone off down a particular path, and maybe in some of the cases there was no way back out of it, and they left maybe all of the grants after them or half of the grants after them just because they got bad advice from whoever, might have been, doesn't matter. So we started doing these, and I suppose what we decided to do was create a situation where we were your point of contact, and we are able to explain everything on the right here. So whether it's BER companies, window and door guys, insulation, solar, SEI and the grants, and then electrical contractors or heat pump contractors or whatever it is. So, and we're able to talk to you, educate you without that being insulting, and at least educate you in our area, and steer you through this maze. And so that's what this is for. Okay, so we're all familiar with seeing this particular graph these days. We know, apologies, that you can have a house from a G, which is, as you can see here, 450 kilowatt hours per square meter per annum. I wouldn't worry about, we don't need to know that today, right? And you don't need to sweat over it. There won't be any exam at the end of this. But but keep in mind that a G is 450 or more, right? Kilowatt hours. So an F, an E, etc. So the idea, I suppose, is that we want to get houses up to as high as possible for as cheap as possible. And you can see here at the left-hand side what that means in actual terms. So again, we won't be spending too much time at all talking about kilowatt hours today, other than you can see, again, you have 450 kilowatt hours at the bottom, and you have A1 being less than 25 kilowatt hours at the top. That will become important later on, because you can see that to get particular grants, we have to improve the house by 100 kilowatt hours per square meter. So if, as you can see there, if we start at 100, well, in order to prove that we're improving the house by 100 kilowatt hours, well, we'd have to be consuming no energy, so that wouldn't be possible. So, you know, anyway, we'll talk about that when we get to it, but keep that picture in mind. So obviously, if I start down and I'm down at 260, well, if I improve that by 100, I'm up at 160, so I can easily achieve the 100 kilowatt hour lift. Whereas if I'm already very good, it gets harder and harder to hit that target. So what are the best upgrades? So I took this little picture from the SAI website. You can go on there and you can play with all of these little toggle buttons or whatever they call them. But in general, the way we look at upgrades is we base them on how effective they are, how disruptive they are, and how expensive they are. So you can have a very effective upgrade measure, but it might be very expensive and it might be really disruptive. And if you're living in the house, well, you might decide, well, I can't do that. What's my next best option? So in general, I just try to put figures on it. Again, we pulled this from the SAI website. So they state that up to 30% of your energy gets lost through the roof. Up to 35 gets lost through the walls. Up to 10 is through the windows and doors. That's directly through the window now, as opposed to leaking around the window, under the window boards or whatever it is. Then up to about 10% through the floor, and then up to 30% through ventilation. So ventilation might be, you know, a badly fitting door, a leakage coming in around windows, leakage coming up through a floor, maybe with a suspended timber floor, leakage due to chimneys, and so on and so on. So, or it might be, believe it or not, directly through a wall. I mean, a concrete wall, believe it or not, is quite porous. So that's kind of puts figures on it. So I'm going to talk very briefly. I'm not going to allow that to start for 2 seconds. I'm going to talk very briefly about the upgrade options and the grants. And we'll start here at the roof of this particular house and its solar panels. We would often talk about them last, but these fellows will produce electricity for your house. It typically feeds into your fuse board, and it can go wherever you want, whether it's running the TV or running your hot water cylinder or anything else, maybe a heat pump. In roof insulation, you can see here there are 3 different amounts. The last one being a detached house for 3,000. You can see the same with the ceiling. So the ceiling is where we're insulating on the flat. If you're standing this in the attic, it would be below your feet. For a detached house, that's €1,500. The roof insulation we just saw, it was where you'd be insulating above your head in an attic. Mechanical ventilation, you can't get as an individual measure. It has to be a multiple measure project. Windows the same. You can get up to €4,000 for detached or 3,000 for semi-detached. Again, it has to be multiple measure. Doors the same. You can get up to €800 per door, maximum 2 doors. And obviously those doors have to be external doors. Internal doors don't obviously do anything to maintain heat or energy. So you get €2,000 to upgrade your radiators or heating system. If you were installing a heat pump, they'll give you, as I say, 2,000 to make it, as they call it, heat pump compatible. If you're gutting your house and redoing the floor insulation, you get up to €3,500 for that. It has to be a minimum thickness, and again, has to be part of a multiple measure grant. An air source heat pump or an air to water heat pump. You can see there are 2 different grant amounts. One is for 6,500 as a BEH, but if you're going into a BEC or a one-stop shop, you can get 8,500 because there's a bonus payment, and there are other bonus payments we'll see in a second. External wrap is up to €8,000. That's where we're insulating on the external wall of the house. Cavity wall insulation is detached house is €1,700. That's quite an easy one to install, and it is quite effective and it's quite cheap. So that's we would always do that if it was available. Dry lining, on the other hand, is going on the inner leaf of the house. You get €4,500 towards that, because literally everything that's on an inside wall of your house now has to move. Every socket, every radiator, every curtain pole or whatever it's called, anything that's fitted to an inside wall. Your toilets, your showers, your kitchen, all of that has to move. So, but typically under a one-stop shop or a BEC, unless the house is very large, and yes, we do see some of those, but you know, your semi-detached house or your normal size standard house, you're getting up to kind of 60 to 80% grants. So we're going to be talking about 3 types of grants today. The first one is the fully funded energy upgrade. I must actually stop introducing that the way I just did, because it's the one grant I will not be talking about today, because we don't do it. It's available for anyone who's getting a fuel poverty allowance or fuel allowance, and there are 7 criteria why you would be getting that. Some people are entitled to that fuel allowance and aren't aware they are, and it's well worth getting set up. If anybody is in that category, you know, it's mobility allowance, carers allowance, single parent. Yeah, I should probably have them on this presentation, but anyway, there's 7 criteria. They're all up on the SCI website. If anybody is in that scenario, make contact with us. We point you in the right direction, but we're not on that framework ourselves. Anyway, but if you are looking at that, it's free. Everything is covered for free. Now there is a 3-year wait on those projects. So a lot of people that we send off on that route, they come back to us and they say, well, yeah, we're not waiting around for that. We're happy to pay a few quid, provided they have a bit of money, and they fall into the third option here. So the second option is the individual energy upgrade grants. This would formerly have been known as a BEH, a Better Energy Homes grant. So that's the individual measures. And then we'll talk also about one-stop shops. This is also known as there's I suppose, a variant of this. It's called a BEC, a Better Energy Communities grant. If you go looking for that, you're not going to see an awful lot about it. And the reason is that the public can't access that directly. They have to come to somebody like Ashgrove, who will put together something like a bunch of domestic houses, maybe 20 or 50 domestic houses with local community centres or shops or something, maybe a small school or a creche or something like that, and which will become a communities grant. So, but we're seeing that, as we know, this one-stop shop hasn't taken off. We just saw the figures in the last few days that they've only done 80 of them this year in Ireland, and they were expecting to do something like 15,000. I don't know the figures exactly, but and the reason is the one-stop shop really is there are projects that are perfect for the one-stop shop, but 70 or 80% of them are not. And as I say, the BEC is every bit as good without the restrictions. We'll discuss the differences as we go. So the individual measures, first of all. So who is this for? So this would be for a homeowner or a landlord who wants to upgrade an individual or to do an individual measure. So attic insulation would be quite typical. Maybe solar panels, maybe a heat pump, something like that. They want to manage the project themselves, or they, in this case, kind of have no choice. Of course, they'll be taking guidance from whoever it is they're engaging. They'll apply for the grant themselves, and importantly, they will pay for the full cost of the measure of the works upfront, and they claim the grant afterwards. So that's where we would do, or someone would do the attic insulation for them. They would charge them, I'm going to say, €2,000, and once they have all the paperwork complete, they will go off and they'll get their €1,500 back 6 weeks later from SAI. So, or something like that. So, and those payments are quite quick, by the way. So, you know, it's not like it was maybe 5 years ago where you could have been waiting months. So, criteria for the home. So the house has to be built before 2011 for insulation and heating controls. Whereas if you wanted a heat pump or solar panels, the house could be considerably newer. And the reason for that is if you built a house in 2020 and you had poor insulation, they would consider it to be your own fault because you should have followed the building regulations. Whereas you could have built a house in 2019 or 2020 without a heat pump or solar and still have been in compliance with the building regulations. Now, the reality is you probably would have had to install one or the other of them. But say if you installed solar and that ticked the box for, as they call it, Part L of the building regulations, they will still give you grant funding to put in maybe a heat pump. So either way, so I'm going to go down through these. So everything as an individual measure has to be done by a specialist SAI registered contractor. So you want to take a drink, guys? So you can see here that a heat pump, you're getting 6,500. For an apartment, it's less. We won't be talking about apartments much today unless somebody has questions. An air-to-air heat pump, again, we won't be talking about that unless somebody has questions. We would typically, we won't talk about it today. I'll skip, I don't need waste time. Heating controls, up to €700 for heating controls for an existing boiler. We typically at Ashgrove don't do that. We specialise on staying away from gas and oil boilers, I suppose, and renewables. The solar hot water heater, this is where you have either tubes or a flat plate collector on your roof. The water flows through it, and as it does so, it gets heated up, and that heats your hot water tank. We don't see many of them today, being honest, except it was something like maybe a swimming pool or something like that, where they were using vast quantities either to heat shower water or to heat the pool itself. We typically don't see a lot of solar. Now, maybe, we'll cover it either at the end if we have time, or in another webinar. But why we don't use these anymore? They were very popular 10 years ago, and they're not anymore, but there's quite a good reason for that. So attic insulation, again, you can see here you have mid-terrace, you have semi-detached or end of terrace, and you have detached houses, and you have 3 different figures. That's obvious enough why that is. Detached houses tend to be bigger. Mid-terrace houses have less heat loss and tend to be maybe that little bit smaller. So, and the grant reflects that. Cavity wall insulation, €800 to €1,700 for detached. Internal dry lining, €2,000 to €4,500 for detached, and external, as you can see here, €3,500 up to €8,000. So the one thing to note about any of those is that when you go to insulate your attic, we just say you've 4 inches of insulation on the attic. If you bring that up to 10 inches, it's theoretically possible that you hit most of the criteria for the grant. So you might get your house to the B2, which it has to reach. Sorry, that's under the next grant. Apologies, I must jump ahead of myself. Shut your mouth, Shane. You don't have to reach any particular BER to get wall insulation, attic insulation, or whether external or internal. The only one there that you have to hit B2 is your heat pump. And the reason is they don't want you putting a heat pump into a poor house. So that your house has to hit a B2. It has to hit this HLI figure that some of you might have heard of. It's the heat loss indicator. So that tells you that my house is losing less than 2 watts per square meter per degree Kelvin. We don't need to remember that number, but we have to do what's known as a BER and a technical assessment. A lot of people come into us with technical assessments and think they're all, with BERs, and they don't have the technical assessment done, or they get to the end of their project and say, right, I want to square up my paperwork and claim the grant, and all of a sudden we realize they don't have a technical assessment done as part of BER, and all of a sudden we have a very awkward conversation. So any place where you're installing a heat pump, you have to have a technical assessment. By the way, it's to your benefit because you now know whether your house is suitable for a heat pump or not. And that's the long and short of it. So we didn't cover there. The last one was a BER. So you get €50 towards your BER. In this particular case, it's different for a one-stop shop or a BEC. And then solar is the same in this type of grant or the other. So you can see there, the first 2 kilowatts of solar, you'll get 900 per kilowatt. So if you put in 2 kilowatts, you'd get 2 nines, so that's 1800. The next 2 kilowatts from 2 up to 4, you'll get 300 per kilowatt. So if you did 4 kilowatts, you'd get 1800 for the first 2, and you'd get 600 for the second 2, maximum of or maximum there being 2400. So and with any of these projects or any of these upgrades, you from when you get the green light, you have 6 months to complete. So when I say green light, in some of these cases you have to apply for the grants. So for a heat pump you have to apply, solar panels you have to apply, with the insulation and stuff like that. You can go away and do it and you can claim it after. So and you just do post-works BER. So in the case of the heat pump, you have to do a pre-works BER and you have to do a post-works BER. Yeah, okay. So yeah, 6 months to do. We don't do an awful lot, I'd say, today of individual measures. I would say probably less than 20% of our work is of this type, but it's still, I suppose, considerable. So I'll jump forward. A one-stop shop or a BEC. I'll explain the BEC in a second. Yeah, so the question there, cost for a technical assessment. So cost for a technical assessment, it's a BER and technical assessment. We see anything from probably 450 to up to probably 700 euro, but yeah, probably the range. But in a lot of these cases, you know, we don't need anything very fancy, so it's worth your while shopping around, especially if you're dealing with a company like Ashgrove. We have 5 in-house BER assessors. We're not allowed to do these BERs or the technical assessments for the simple reason that you know, we need the SEI need a third party. We understand it. They're afraid of a situation where you know, you have a sheriff and cowboy both in the same situation, in the same company. So good. So who is the one-stop shop for? So again, a homeowner or a landlord. So landlords can, if they had 100 properties, they can get 100 one-stop shops or 100 BECs done. Multiple upgrade measures are being considered. The projects have to get to a B2, so there's no debate about that. It's a fully managed solution by somebody like Ashgrove or on Post or whoever, and the customer pays for the works net of the grant. So if the upgrade works were going to cost you 40,000 and the grants were 27, well, the end user pays typically what we might pay Ashgrove 6,500 maybe as a deposit, and the most they will pay us is 13. We have to wait for the rest from SEAI, right? So that's one of the big benefits is that. So the criteria for these homes, in this case, for insulation or renewable energy, it has to be before 2011, right? Now, as I say, all homes must complete minimum level of upgrades. So you have to be in a one-stop shop, you have to do both energy and insulation, and you have to get your house to the B2. There are other criteria we'll be talking about in a second. So that's it. So I keep going. Go forward for me. So now, so I've just highlighted in yellow here what is different about the one-stop shop or the BEC grants. And so you can see here for the first time, you have the same heat pump grant here. You can see, by the way, I've written in here is a specialist contractor, again, an SEI contractor, 6,500. But provided you hit the criteria for the one-stop shop or the BEC, you get a bonus payment of, I'll skip down here, 2,000 for the heat pump. So that's what they call a launch bonus. Now that's supposed to be disappearing at the end of this year. We don't think it probably will, right? But in theory, it's supposed to. You have this 2,000 to upgrade your heating system. You couldn't avail of that as an individual measure. So, for example, if you had radiators that were sized to work with an oil or a gas boiler, which presumably many of you do, if you have radiators that are too small, bear in mind they might not be too small by the time you insulated your walls or insulated your attics or changed the windows or doors or whatever. So you'd be losing less heat, and as a result, the radiator might actually now be large enough. So, but if they're not, there's €2,000 there to assist you in upgrading them, either in size or maybe it is in quality. Maybe they're at the end of life and they need to be thrown out. So either way, there's €2,000. The launch bonus, as I've said, is there. Floor insulation, you can't avail of this as a single measure. I don't understand why. I suppose it's very unlikely that somebody will be happy with windows, doors, attic or walls or everything else and decide to rip out the floors. But yeah, so but other than that, I don't know why. But it's €3,500. Again, like the attic insulation, it has to hit a minimum U value, and that has to be calculated for your particular house. In general, it comes back in at about 5 inches. So if you're upgrading the floor, it typically comes in at 5 inches, but it has to be calculated. Sorry, I think I started off saying that about the attic a while ago and I got sidetracked. So yeah, the same thing with the wall insulation. When you get a grant to upgrade a wall insulation, it has to then reach a particular U value. Otherwise, when you provide your evidence, they'll say, well, you've put on dry lining, it needed to be 2 inches, you put on 1 inch, and yeah, you're not getting your grant. So we do obviously need to play by the rules. So you can see here, windows and doors. That's actually a mistake there now that I see it written down. It says specialist contractor written in here. Actually, that's one of the grants where you do not need to be a specialist contractor. So, and the reason for it is that anybody can fit them without worrying really about the ventilation requirement for the building. Now, when they say there that the window guy doesn't need to worry about it, they actually make that responsibility Ashgroves or whoever your contractor is, your one-stop shop is. Same with the floor insulation, by the way. You don't, if I insulate a floor, I'm not interfering with the ventilation of a building. Whereas the reason that we'll say with attic insulation or rafter insulation or cavity wall insulation or external or dry lining, I can insulate a house and I can seriously damage the ventilation in the house to the point where I get a lot of mildew and the house can become unhealthy. So they're making that the responsibility of the contractor. So windows can be done by anybody, but the responsibility for the ventilation is, in this case, Ashgroves. External doors, you can't get those as an individual measure. You can get up to 2 of those, so €1,600. Mechanical ventilation, €1,500. That's a very difficult grant to get. The criteria are incredibly precise, so much so that I think, I won't go into it maybe now, but if you can imagine that if you have 10 or 15 vents in your house, and every time you close one a tiny bit, well, all the rest of them get slightly more air, and you're going around, you could spend days trying to balance it. It's a very precise thing, and we do a lot of this, and even at that, it's very very unrealistic, we feel. So anyway, just flagging it. It's up there, but difficult to get. Air tightness is probably one of the ones that we do not know at the start whether you'll get the €1,000 or not. The reason for that is everything else, by the way, is a theoretical figure or theoretical analysis of your house. Your U values are always theoretical. There's no way of physically testing whether your house is performing as an A or a C. If you've put X amount of insulation on the wall, and we know that the wall is cavity construction or whatever it is, there's a U value that is calculated for that, and that goes into the calculation. So we know when we start every project, as you can see in this case here, I'm sorry, I'll be showing you in a second a case study. We know at the start of the project that a person will get 5,000 or will get 32,000 of grants. We will know all of those with certainty at the start, other than air tightness, right? You can see here, you can get home energy assessment. That has jumped from €50 under the individual measure to 350 in this case. And then lastly, you can see project management. So again, you couldn't get this as an individual measure. So for a detached house, that jumps to €2,000. With with a one-stop shop or a BEC, you have 12 months to complete your project. The reason for that is you can have people, of course, there's a lot more work going on, maybe external wrap being a slow process and is weather dependent. Obviously, you certainly couldn't install it on a day like we've had here today, pouring rain all day. So typically external wrap wouldn't be done between now and probably March. I would say, yeah, almost definitely I'd say it's probably finished for this year. Okay, we move on. So that's that. Any questions on that? Firing them on into me there and covering them as I'm going when I can. So, okay. So I'll actually explain first of all there before I move on the difference between the one-stop shop and the BEC. The BEC was put in place to help people in a situation where they were living in a house. If you can picture living in a house, the house is okay. It was built maybe 20 years ago. They're not going to move out for 6 weeks or 6 months. They want to maybe insulate the attic, maybe pump the cavity walls, maybe install a heat pump, install solar panels, maybe change whatever it is, the doors, right? And that's all fine. So the one-stop, so in a case like that, we would engage with the customer. We'd give them a price for doing it. It would already have maybe the grants subtracted, so they would see the price that they are paying. They would say, go ahead. We'd schedule the works depending on what's being done. That would be maybe 6 or 8 weeks. If there's windows, it's probably taking a bit longer than that. But if it's just, you know, solar, attic insulation and heat pumps, it might be, I'm going to say 6 weeks, 7 weeks. Windows are a bit slower at the moment, so they tend to hold things up. External wall insulation, as I've just said, we definitely hold things up. So, but in the case that we landed today to start your project, there's a chance that we'd be finished this day week. So it's quite quick. And in that case, the customer pays us the net amount, and it's our responsibility then to wait, to submit the forms, go off to SEI and wait for the money. So that's fine. We're not out of pocket for a long period of time. Okay. So in the case where we had a BEC, so this might be somebody who has a house that it's a deep retrofit, so they're taking out floors, they're taking out windows, the walls are maybe being knocked, some of them, or whatever it is. Actually, one thing is just popping into my head when we were talking about the age of the buildings earlier, that they were before 2021, before 2011. That's based on the MPRN number. That's the electrical connection into your house, is what that's based on. Now, there are exceptional circumstances where you might have a new MPRN, but clearly the house is 100 years old. Well, we just need to find a way of convincing some guy at SCI that that's the case, but that's not a problem. Anyway, come back to what I was saying. So a person who is taking a house apart, taking out the floors, maybe they've suspended timber floors that are notoriously drafty, air blowing up through the floorboards, etc. So in that case, there might be a small builder involved. And where a one-stop shop doesn't work here is you have a contract with your builder, and all of a sudden there's a one-stop shop involved. And part of the criteria for the one-stop shop is that any works where we are claiming grants. So we're claiming grants, for argument's sake there, for the floor insulation, the heating system. So you might be redoing the heating system, the wall insulation, the windows, the doors, etc., and the heating and attic. So the cash flow for that, or the trail of invoicing, has to be through the one-stop shop. So in this case, we would be paying your building contractor for the floor insulation, maybe for the heating system, whether it's underfloor or radiators. Next thing, we're paying him for the wall insulation, the windows, and so on. Meanwhile, you're paying him for concrete works, you're paying him for internal doors, you're paying him for all the things that are not grant related. So now you can see here very quickly, you have a contract with us, you also have a contract with your builder, and we have a contract with your builder. And all of a sudden, the day that there's a problem then between a window and a wall, well, you know, that doesn't work, because who's responsible for it now? So the one-stop shop doesn't really work for that type of project. So the BEC has really ended up taking over there. It wasn't originally intended for this, but it is, where your builder can continue to do his works, and then he would supply us with all of the information that we need for the grants, and then we would go off and do the grants for you. So I'll show you a case study in 2 seconds of how that might look, or what that might look like. So here's a one-stop shop case study. We did these last year. These were people who contacted us with houses from 2003. 103 square meters. So you can see the picture there on the bottom right is the actual project. We ended up doing quite a few of them in the finish. So they're semi-D, 2-story. The pre-works BER was a C2, so quite good already. So I'll tell you the story. First of all, they contacted us about solar panels early last summer, and when we looked at the house, we realized that we could get to the B2 and we could hit the other criteria to get out of the BEH grant, to get out of the individual measure grant, and try and avail of all these bonus payments we were talking about there a while ago. And so in this case, we looked at attic and cavity wall insulation, an air to water heat pump, and solar panels. So that got us to the B2. We were able to improve the house by the 100 kilowatt hours. The houses also came under this heat loss indicator, the HLI figure. And so we got a grant in this case amounting to approximately 70%. So the cost of these houses entirely after the grants was 8,106. And so solar for these houses as a standalone measure after the grant would probably have been somewhere in the region of about 6,000, maybe 7,000, right? So you can see there that the attic insulation is getting done for basically the cost of for the amount of the grant. So it's costing you nothing. The cavity are probably costing you a few quid, and then you're unlocking all of these bonus payments that come under the BEC or the one-stop shop. So these houses got to an A3, and you can see here from a C2 to an A3 for 8,000. So straight away now they're into the green mortgage category. So they're saving probably, I'm guessing, depending on how much is left on the mortgage, but they're saving 1,000 a year on top of any energy savings, and on top of increasing the resale value of their property. So that's a typical one-stop shop type project. So a typical BEC type project is this is a house, again, you probably saw 6 months ago, an old house being totally redone with an extension out the back. So it was built in the 70s. It was 1,050 square feet. It had an extension, a mass concrete extension added onto the back of it like they did back in the day. That was going to be leveled. So what am I going to say here? So everything that these people ended up doing, they were doing anyway, right? So I'm going to zoom into this. I often screw this up, so I hope it works. Yeah, okay, good man. So you can see here, so they were looking for a heat pump because they're doing insulation. So these guys are doing everything. They're doing the floors, they're doing the walls, windows, attic, heat pump, and solar panels. So you can see here, they'll get the 6,500, but because they're doing insulation and getting to the B2 and all the other things, they're getting 2,000 to upgrade the heating system. They'll get the bonus payment for the heat pump. They're insulating the attic. They're insulating the floor. They'll get 3,500. They're getting the 2,400 for the solar panels. They're going to, in this case, getting external wall insulation for the original house. They're getting 4,000 for the windows. They're getting 800 for each of the doors, so that's 1,600. They're getting, we've assumed they'll get the mechanical ventilation, but there's always an asterisk beside that, as there is beside the air tightness. And then they get the home energy assessment, and they get 2,000 for project management. So that amounts there to in total 36,350 for works that they were doing anyway, right? No, sorry, I should say there's energy credits on top of that. So the energy credits are, you might, some of you might be familiar, it's like a carbon credit. And sometimes when we hear of carbon credits, it's probably to do with the big factories and having carbon obligations. Well, when you save energy along the way, when you do a home energy upgrade like this, you generate these, we call it carbon credits. In Ireland, they're known as energy credits, but you can trade them. So you have a guy somewhere who is supposed to save carbon in his factory, but rather than doing so, he will buy your energy credits and he can use them instead of actually paying for the works. Either way, in a case like this house that we just looked at, depending on the size of it, it's probably worth about €1,200. So we can add 1,200 onto that 36, or whatever that comes to, 37,550, whatever it is. Either way, so that's so in this case, the builder will have done. Let's do it like this. So we could have done all of those bits if you wanted us to, but the builder is paying for it as we go, and we go off after and get the grants. So in this case, we're not behaving as a bank for the project. So in the same way as the one-stop shop might want us to. And the reason for that is that if this project started today, you can imagine easily that this project mightn't be finished for 10 months. So this is a big project. And in that case, we would say to the customer, you know, we have whatever 13 or 1400 of these projects a year. We cannot act as a bank for you here. You know, this is a mortgage type project anyway. We want your mortgage to fund the project. We get you the grants after, and so you can put that money at the end of it to whatever you want. Some people will say to us, Shane, we don't want you on site at all because we're in someplace inaccessible, the tippy top of Donegal or someplace, and we have our own contractors. What we do want from you, Shane, is that when we do our BER and technical assessment, we want you to give us very specific directions as to what we need to do in our house. So what thickness of insulation, what type of insulations we need for our floor, what do we need for the walls, the U values of the windows, the U value and thickness of the ceiling insulation or attic insulation or whatever it is, type of heat pump, the efficiency of the heat pump, same with the solar. And so when we do that, that's what the technical assessment feeds in. That technical assessment tells us whether we're hitting this HLI figure. We spoke about this heat loss indicator. It tells us the type of heat pump that will comply or not. And what we do is we transfer all of that into layman's talk. And somebody goes up and they now have a recipe. And provided they follow that recipe, you can carry out the project. Once we get back then at the end of all of this, the relevant evidence. So for your floor insulation, we want to see that it was the thickness. We want to see photos. Wall insulation the same, and we want to see a cert then from an SEI registered wall insulator or wall insulating contractor. So whether it was external wall, cavity wall, or dry lining, they have to be SEI registered. Same with the ceiling. With windows and doors, we just want certs. We just say it was Energy Glazing or ABC Limited, Munster Joinery, whoever it is, Senator, doesn't matter. We just a one pager, we installed 24 square meters of glazing at this house. The U value was 1.3, it was 1.2, or it was whatever. But whatever appears on that needs to be what we had pre-calculated. So if we have a house with a lot of glass, whether most of you know it or not, is not a great insulator. So comparing it to a standard wall, windows are typically 5 to maybe 10 times worse than a wall. So therefore, if you have a lot of windows in a house, in order to reach the B2 and the HLI figures and all the rest of it, the 100 kilowatt hours, the glass has to be better than it might be otherwise. So we could have one house where the windows might be 1.4. That's the worst they can be to get the grant. But we could have a house next door that now has a lot of glazing, and it might have windows that are at 1.1 or 1 or whatever it is. We calculate that for you, and you can go off and do it. So you don't need to use window guys that we suggest. We don't sell windows. If you want us to get windows, we go out to 10 companies and get prices. Companies we can send over, we can get the windows for you, but we're not trying to sell you windows. We're not trying to sell you insulation. Our background is renewable energy, and that's the core bit. Everything else we're doing really is to assist you with the grants. So, so there's 3 ways of doing that. One of them would be where we are doing everything that is grant related for you. There's another scenario where we literally will not set foot on site other than quality inspections, and you will supply us with all of the paperwork. And for that, in that case, we'll just say out of that 36,000 here, we would charge a fee in a situation like that of maybe 4,000, right? So something like that. And then there's another scenario where that your builder is doing 60% of the work and you just want us to do the heat pump, or you just want us to do the solar panel. Well, that's fine. We can do that as well. So either way, we have 3 different types of contracts for the 3 different, I suppose, methodologies. So, okay, my mouse selected for me. Sorry, guys. So the eligibility criteria, again, just to cover it, for a one-stop shop or BC, the eligibility criteria is identical other than the flows of cash and invoicing. Houses have to be before 2011. I've said there that the BER has to be below C2. That's not strictly speaking true, but you can take it that it is right. Now, the reason for that is if it's a C1 or a B3, it's unlikely, if not impossible, for you to improve your house by the 100 kilowatt hours. So to give you a guide, we're saying C2. So if you're a C3, as we saw there a while ago in those houses at Cairnwood, they were all C3s. We were able to improve those by the 100 kilowatt hours. Of course, if the house is a G or an F, it's very easy to improve them by 100 kilowatt hours because you have plenty of space. The question is, will you get it up as far as the B2? So must achieve the B2 or higher after works. So some people arrive to us sometimes looking at maybe a heat pump and they say, but my house is only a B3. Yeah, but it'll be a B2 or a B1 after you install the heat pump. So some bit of ambiguity there. Measures must reduce the energy consumption by 100 kilowatt hours per square meter per annum. Square meters is missing, but it is per square meter. We have to do a thing called an SR50. So this is to satisfy, but it's to satisfy the government ultimately. But a lot of people are satisfied by it that there's, I suppose, a layer of due diligence needed for a heat pump. So if you wanted to install a heat pump in your house, even if we wanted to, we couldn't install a heat pump that wasn't suitable, or we couldn't install a heat pump into a house that wasn't suited. What that means is, as we often hear, heat pumps in a house where the running costs are high. And this is typically down to, it can be down to a few things, but more often than not, it's down to the radiators being too small. And if that radiator is too small, I'll give you an example. The room I'm standing in now is probably 20 square meters or something like that. If you can imagine, it's losing, after we've calculated out through the window here in front of me, and the 3 outside walls or 2 outside walls, sorry, 1 outside wall in this case, and out through the roof, say I'm losing a kilowatt, so 1,000 watts, but the radiator that was previously connected to an oil boiler, which was running at 80 degrees, will produce 1 kilowatt, no problem. But when I connect it to a heat pump that will run at 50 degrees, it will only generate, I'm going to say, 600 watts. So is the radiator big enough? We have to calculate. And so that's what the SR50 is done for. Every room in your house, when this is done, you will know that every radiator is suitable. If it is not suitable, you won't get the grant. And the reason is, if it's not suitable, if it's too small, the heat pump will have to be turned up higher than it should, and it will have to run longer than it should. And it's obvious enough that the result of that will be high running costs. So HLI, this is below 2. This is watts per square meter. We won't spend any time with it, but so you'll get the grant for the heat pump provided the house is below 2. If it's between 2 and 2.3, I don't know why I've written this backwards, between 2.3 and 2, we need to carry out another layer of tests. But it is possible, and again, that gets picked up in your technical assessment. So if it was a case that you were outside of the 2 or the 2.3, what we might say in that case is, well, what happens if we, say for argument's sake, say your house was 2.05? We would say, well, what happens if we change the back door? Well, yeah, I was thinking of changing the back door anyway. I'll get €800 for it. It's going to cost me 1,000, so I'll get that brought down. we would pop into the software, okay, we're changing the back door, and it'd say, okay, that has brought me down to 1.98 or whatever it is. So now my project is compliant. So sometimes, you know, you have to do a small bit of, what would you call it, juggling to get things to work. So again, we're talking about there, if the house is between 2 and 2.3, what SEI will say, okay, if it's below 2, we're not going to question anything. We'll give you the grant for the heat pump, no questions. If it's between 2 and 2.3, well, now we're going to ask a lot of questions. What is the U value of your walls? What is the U value of your windows? What is the U value of your attic, etc., etc. And at that point, they'll say, right, well, you know, you're outside of the main criteria. We would like you to change that there for the, you know, the grant seasons, if the grants aren't available, right? Now, sometimes they might take a view, if you were very close to being compliant, they might give you a green light, but you're pleading at that point. We don't like to be in that scenario. So take it that it's 2 and 2.3 and that they're hard criteria. So the grants may not be drawn twice for any upgrade measure. Immediately, that's incorrect. Even though I wrote it myself, I know it's, you know what I was thinking. In general, you can't draw it twice, right? So, but in some cases, if I have insulated my attic 10 years ago and drew a grant for it, at that point, the attic insulation might have been maybe to get you from 2 inches up to 6 inches. Whereas today, the standard for attic insulation is 12 inches, so you can get the grant a second time, right? If you, by the way, we can check that if somebody has drawn the grant, we can check by, if you give us your MPRN number, that's the number on the top right hand corner of your electricity bill. It's an 11-digit number starting with 1000 normally. So we can check if any grants have ever been drawn for your house. So yeah, the other thing is, if you've already gotten grants for, we'd say something like pumping a cavity wall, you can get grants for external wrap, or you can get grants for dry line, right? If you're doing 2 of them, so you decided to do dry lining and external wall, you'll obviously, well, sorry, not so obvious, you'll get grants for 1 of them. Obviously, you'll go there for the more expensive one, you go for the external wrap, it being 8,000 for a detached house. So, but you can't get grants for both. So a BER and technical assessment need to be current. So we see people all the time with a 5-year-old BER and it shows a C2 or whatever it is. If you're going for grants, it needs to be current, which means it needs to be less than 12 months old. And that gives the SEI guys a fair indication that, you know, if it's 5 years old, sure, God only knows, like, you know, there could have been LED lights, there could have been upgrade works to the house. By what I remember that is, there could be doors, windows blown out, there could have been 10,000 square foot extension built on. So the BER is no longer current. Of course, it being 12 months old, it could have the same inaccuracy in it, but we're, you know, they have to start somewhere. So they're saying it has to be less than 12 months. If you're not sure about your project, what we would say to anybody is, make sure when you're going getting your BER and technical assessment, if you're not sure you're starting in the 12 months, tell them to do the BER, but don't publish it. And that means don't put it up in the database in Dublin, because the minute it goes up in that database, your 12-month clock is ticking. You can still have the benefit, you can have it in your hand, they'll send it to you, and you can still make your decisions based on it, but the clock isn't ticking. When you're starting your project, then you'd start the clock ticking, you tell them to publish the BER, and what you would do at that point then is you'd apply for your grants. Once you apply for your grants, you'll see it here in a second, you, again, for the one-stop shop or the BEC, you have 12 months to deliver it, as opposed to the 6 months for the BEH, the individual measure. So what I've just outlined above are indeed in the previous 18 slides. There's a lot of HLIs and kilowatt hours and C2s and BERs. Don't be daunted by that. You know, that's our job, to keep you on the straight and narrow. You are paying us, if you work with us, to make sure you don't make mistakes. Now, any place that there's a potential banana skin, we will scream it, because we don't want to be in a position when we get to the end of a project where somebody went on a bit of a solo run, they ran out of money, they didn't bother changing the 2 back windows, you know. it's very easy to pick up the phone here and ask whoever you were dealing with at our place, if I don't do these windows, what happens? Okay, well, okay, number one, straight away, you won't get the grants for the windows, so that's €4,000 gone. But in the event that it pulled you back out of maybe a B2 to a B3, or your HLI snuck over the 2.0, or your 100 kilowatt hours wasn't being met, all of a sudden, maybe all of the grants are gone. So we'll be screaming that. I'm sure everybody is sick of us hearing it as we go through the projects. But it's our job to make sure we're not having awkward conversations later on. So, and by the way, that's even if, as I said a while ago, if we weren't on site looking after it, probably even more so because we have less control over it. But you're dealing with your own building contractor. We'll tell him he needs windows at 1.1 or whatever it is, and doors at whatever, and floor and ceiling. We'll be screaming that you're very careful. So the steps, so that if you were considering a project like this, we would get the BER done and the technical assessment if you're considering a heat pump. We'd agree a contract, so the BER and the technical assessment tells us where the house is, and onto that then we have a picture of your house, and onto that we kind of install upgrade measures. So we'd improve the walls, and that would bring us from, let's say you're a D1, if we did the walls, that might bring us to a C3 or a C2, change the back door and the front door, might bring us to a C1, install the heat pump and solar and attic insulation, that all gets us to the B2 or the B1. So we now know what we have to do to get to the as high as possible. Obviously, we don't stop when we hit the B2. We agree then what that contract is, whether we're doing all the works for you, or whether you're doing half the works, or whether you're doing all the works. It includes the price, the grants, the fees, the energy credits, waivers. There's waivers there in some of the cases. We won't worry about it today, but there are ventilation requirements for some rooms in the house, and some people don't want them, and they sign a waiver to say, I was made aware of the ventilation requirement in that room, and I'm happy that I am not meeting that particular requirement. You can do that, and we will advise you as we go. Again, we have to supply all of that to SCAI in order to satisfy them that we've gone through it properly. So once we agree the contract with you, however it's happening, whether we're doing it or whether you're doing it, or in the case of one-stop shop, obviously we are doing it. Then we apply for the grant before the works start. So we carry out, or we look after that application, and that's all of the data and figures and everything else is included in that. So if we apply as a one-stop shop, that's an immediate green light. That's 3 seconds or whatever it takes for the computer to spit it back out to you to go ahead. And with the BEC, that's a 6-week turnaround. Now that's theoretical. In reality, they're an immediate turnaround. The reason for that is, the one-stop shop software where you're loading it in was set up really for the one-stop shops, whereas the BEC has to be put in as part of commercial and industrial projects, community projects. The reality is it's not a 6-week turnaround. The reason it's not is they simply can't get enough of these projects. They had a target last year of 15,000. They did 3,700. So basically, once you're hitting the criteria, if you apply, you're getting it. It would be different if they had a budget for 15,000 projects and there was 30,000 applying. They would filter through it and take the best of the 30,000 and give them the go-ahead. And that would be based on, of course, but carbon savings as opposed to anything else. So once we get the green light, we receive grant approval, we then begin works, and we have 12 months to complete the project at this point and put in the paperwork and claim the grants. And in both of these cases, the grants land to, I'm going to say Ashgrove, but whoever your contractor is. Now, in some cases, if there's like COVID, they gave everybody a month or 2 extra if you provided you requested it. I suspect that they'll be getting tired of that shortly. So we've gone through that in detail. I'm going to skip this a little bit. It's because I want to jump on the last few weeks. But we have about another 5 minutes, and I'm going to spend it on solar. We've more or less covered the way that grant will work, how we gather the information, and well, we've done it. You do the BER and the technical assessment. So we'll do the first energy report for you. So we'll give you an idea of the cost. At that point, we'll talk to you, and most people will say, yeah, I'd like an EV charger, an electric vehicle charger while you're there, or I'd like LED lights or whatever it is. We can discuss that. We agree the contract, we go into final design, and then you're into scheduling and installation, and then you're into handover. So fire questions there, guys, if you have any left for me. I'm going to go on here to this is our information day. So obviously we do these webinars every week. We also do seminars once a month. So contact us about those. They're a 3-hour sit down. So I'm going to just spend a tiny bit of time on solar, because the phones are just absolutely hopping here. I'm sure some of you are maybe on this call or maybe here only for solar. So I'm going to give it maybe maximum 10 minutes and then I'll be finished. Let you off to your evenings. So solar panels, I suppose, in its at its simplest, is solar energy is hitting your solar panel, and it generates a DC current, a direct current, which in that state is unusable in your house. So we have to send it through what we call an inverter. So that inverts or converts DC current from DC to AC, like the band. And alternating current, of course, is usable in your house. So 230-volt alternating. So if you had a battery, we would store that before it goes through the inverter. So that gets stored as direct current. And in a case, and I'm going to show you a case study in 2 seconds now of a quote that we sent out here probably 3 weeks ago. I'm using it for a particular reason. In a case where you're generating a lot of electricity today and you're not using it, you can either store it up. You can store it in different ways. You can store it in your hot water tank. You can store it in a battery. You can, if you're not able to store any more of it, you can then, of course, export it out onto the grid. So that grid requires a permission, of course, from your supplier. And we have a video made showing you how to fill that form out. It's very simple. And once your system is below 6 kilowatt, you're guaranteed you can't be turned down. You can't be turned down. I could be eating my words there, but I'm going to say you can't be turned down. I'm not in the solar expert team, let's say. Certainly, once you go above the 6 kilowatt, from 6 to 17 kilowatt, you certainly have to ask permission. And then if you're above 17 kilowatt, you're into a different program again. But of course, you can imagine if everybody in your estate at the end of a line, if everybody was putting out 100 kilowatt, well, straight, at some point the line wouldn't be able to take it. So, there is a restriction. So, is there anything else I want to say on that? So, yeah, so I'll show you how we size the solar. Typically, it starts with the bill. And I'm going to say here, this is a bill. Where's my mouse gone? So you can see here a house. This is south facing, and our software, when you send us an error code, we can tell, number one, where on the planet your house is. So of course, straight away that tells us the solar irradiance. In other words, the amount of solar energy that hits your site. So of course, if you're in Cape Town, South Africa, or if you're in Helsinki, of course, there'll be two different figures. So we take it for the moment that we're in Offaly or someplace like that, right? Maybe not quite so sunny or dull. So you can see here, the image is showing us that this yellow roof will receive the most sunlight on this site. The bit jutting out the front here will receive slightly less, and that's shown by the color. And you can see here, there's a bit of shading, which is cast presumably in the evenings by that chimney. In this case, either way, this customer has decided to go with solar out in their garage. They have power out in the garage, so if they produce electricity out here, they can feed it backwards in through that cable. There was different reasons for that. There's actually Velux on some of these windows or on the roof, and they kind of didn't want it there anyway. So how do we go about it? Well, we know what, in this case, Joe's energy usage. Oh, sugar. We know I didn't intend on doing that, but we're there now anyway. So this is Joe's. So this is a quote that would have gone out. I'll show you the details in a second. So this is the garage. It's rotated around here to fit into the report. So this is a standard quote. You can see here, he's a Velux actually in this corner. So there's 23 panels, which looks slightly unusual when you see it without an explanation. But 23 panels. And he also asked us to look at a small battery. Then he asked us to look at a bigger battery. And you can see here, and then he asked us to look at 18 panels. What you don't see there now as I'm scrolling, you can see the figures are changing. So we know what his energy usage is, and that is represented here by this gray profile. So in winter, it's higher than summer, and then jumps back up there again in November and December. We have that from 15 years of his energy bills. In this case, it's a large house, but this is a very big system. I should have said that at the start. It's typically our systems would be for domestic would be 4 or 6 kilowatt, maybe 5 kilowatts. This is 9.1 or something like that. So it's exceptionally large for a house. There was reasons for that. He has a large house, large heat pumps. He has 2 electric vehicles, and he and his wife both work from home. So, I'm just going to jump here. You can see these figures: 82% self-consumption, energy from solar and export to grid. When I click here, you can see the reports are changing. So they're all changing real time. So once we get your energy bills, we can do quite an in-depth analysis. And this is all based on the science, the location where your house is, how it's orientated to the sun, the angle that your roof sits at. So is it facing towards the sun? Is it facing straight up to the sky or kind of semi away from the sun? So then we can see all this information here. So you can see here the cost of installing, in this case, 23 panels. You can see that it's after the grant, it's 10,300. Over the 20-year life of the heat pump, or of the solar panel, it's saving 39,000. So when I subtract the 10 from the 39, I get 28,900. Now, what's interesting about this is it should be intuitive that adding panels would increase this, and it doesn't. And the reason for that is Joe, we know from his consumption that he's consuming energy during the day, and therefore, as it is being produced by the solar, the site is consuming it. So computers, cars, heat pumps, everything else. So you can see here, if we look at the savings there for 2 seconds, 40,820. If I go like this and hit the 23 panels, so the savings went down 1,600 euro, but my cost was roughly 2,500. And so that's the difference. So I paid, or Joe in this case will have paid 2,500 euro extra, and he saved only 1,600 more. So now the way I would describe that to anybody, I would often describe myself as an example where I leave for my office in the morning at 7 o'clock. So I have what we call a double peak usage. So I'd have a spike of energy consumption in the morning, and I'd have a spike of energy consumption in the evening. Now I'm talking about electrical in this case. And so when the solar wakes up and I start getting sun, well, I'm already gone from the house in most cases. So solar in my case, without a battery, I'm going to be basically exporting all of the energy onto the grid. So a scenario like this. So I'm going to take that out. So if this was me, I would be generating with no battery energy into the home, but I'm not using a lot, so most would be out onto the grid. So I should have a battery, which would be something like this. The house would be taking some, the battery would be taking some as much as it could, and after that, when it can't take any more, it puts it onto the grid, and I get paid 15 or 13 or 18 cent or whatever it is from your energy supplier. So anything else inside in that? So you can see there, if I change to 18 panels, which was being considered at some point, you can see there, okay, the cost has gone down, savings have dropped now 6,000. Now, just so you know, by the way, this is a 20-year prediction, and The solar panels that we're using are Jinko. You can see them here. Jinko Solar, and so far inverter if it's not already written here. And we can put in whatever we want, right? So we can choose whatever product the customer wants. So, but what's interesting here is that in this case, without the battery, it's 10,300 is a net system cost. So that's after the grant. And in this case, he's saving 1,500, 1,600 a year. If he goes to the battery, he'd be saving 1,700 a year. So his savings are gone up, but just his installation cost also went up a bit. Is there anything else I want to show you inside there? So actually, what's interesting actually inside in that also isn't one of the other reasons I put it in here, is that's an east-west facing system, which a lot of people would view as being kind of inefficient. And the figures are, you know, that's a piece of software called Open Solar. We can use PV Sol, or we can use any one of those. We use PV Sol for commercial and industrial applications, etc. So that's all I'm looking at inside there. If there's any questions, guys, fire them up there. So anything else I want to show? No, so I'll shoot back to the presentation if I can find my way back. Close that, close that. Hopefully this does. Yeah. So anyway, look, and this is only a snippet out of the same presentation. So something we hear probably 10 times a day, that I was told by some super duper solar sales guy that I didn't need direct sunlight anymore, that daylight would do me. But you can see quite clearly here in January, I'm getting, this is in kilowatt hours, or sorry, megawatt hours in this case, but kilowatt hours in general per day. And so you can see here that it's much more in June, July, and May than it is in January or December. Now that's intuitive to all of us. None of us should be surprised by seeing that, but it just has made its way around the industry that is the case. So if any of you are living in a house where you have bills, we'll take them off you and we'll convert it into a profile like this. The solar we know will be kind of a standard bell curve then, distributed as roughly as you see there, depending where you are in Ireland, or if you are in Ireland. If you were considering then maybe putting in a heat pump, or maybe an electric car, of course, in general, will be just level across the year. There'd be no reason why it would be weather dependent, maybe, even though it might be, I suppose. But in general, they're typically, you know, the same amount of driving in January as it would maybe in June or July. So we push that in there. So that would push all of these up a little nudge. If you were putting in a heat pump, for example, we would predict what that is. We know that houses, after being upgraded, will consume somewhere around kind of 35 kilowatt hours, or maybe 30 kilowatt hours per square meter per annum. So if your house is 200 square meters, we multiply that by 35, that's 7,000 kilowatt hours. And the heat pump will generate that by consuming, let's say, 2,000 kilowatt hours. So that's obviously a heat pump has a kind of a ratcheting effect. It consumes 2,000 kilowatt hours and it'll produce, consumes 2,000 and it'll produce the 7,000. So they have a ratio roughly from input to output of, let's call it 3.5. It should be higher, but so that's it. Again, we can predict any of that anyway. And again, go back to you with quite a scientific report. So we're trying to convince the country to get away from this voodoo engineering type stuff where, yeah, I think it's grand, it'll be fine, throw it up there. So all of this is quite predictable, as you can see. I just have another question in there now that I didn't cover earlier. Yeah, okay, so that's a good question. So, so we have a question there for the stuff that isn't energy related. How does it get dealt with? So, yeah, so that's not really suited to a one-stop shop. So this question, if I'm reading it correctly, I'll read it again. For a BEC project with Ashgrove, how are additional non-energy elements of the build dealt with? Example, extension or wiring, plumbing, upgrades, etc. So perfect. Good question. So what that would mean is, say somebody ripping out a floor. So do Ashgrove take out floors? No, we don't. Will we put in underfloor? So if a builder or a handyman were to take out and rebuild the floor. We would put in the underfloor heating of the radiators for them, and they would pour concrete. So I know that some of the one-stop shops kind of get into this type of territory, but from what I've seen, the prices are simply extortionate. And what we would do if we had a customer like this who wanted to maybe build a small extension or something like that, we can't be building contractors, because all of a sudden we have project managers tied up for weeks or months in small extensions. So we would try to line you up with somebody locally who's geared for that. So we've seen some of it recently there in North Wicklow, South Dublin, and we just lined them up with guys, same in Cork or in Galway, and that guy or those people would be geared to look after that sort of work. But I can promise, you don't want our project managers looking after something like that. Being honest, we'd be too expensive as well. But I see prices there from some of the other one-stop shops. The prices just creep way up. So there might be tiny amount of works that we would be willing to do, and therefore it mightn't require a building contractor to be involved. But the minute there's an extension, I'd have to say we wouldn't be. We would just say, look, if you can get a small builder, we'll row in beside him, we'll keep him on the straight and narrow, we'll tie in with him and make sure he doesn't, I suppose, contravene any of those criteria we were talking about. So that's the way we would deal with that. I recently saw a project where we put the homeowner in contact with a small builder who loves that kind of stuff, but I think it was one of the big 2 or 3 one-stop shops. The energy providers had given a price of 120,000, where the builder ended up being 70, even with us underneath him. So we were doing a heat pump, heating upgrade, external wrap and whatever, and he was 70 versus 118 or 120 or something like that. So they really are expensive, because they're coming out to somebody like us for a heat pump. Of course, we have project manager involved, we have labor, we have materials, we have overheads, we have profit. The next installation guy has the same. He is another project manager, more overhead, more profit. And, all of a sudden you have a bundle of companies involved under some of these big one-stop shops who aren't from the industry. I'm just going to use maybe An Post as an example. I don't mean to be unfair on them, but, they're coming out to somebody like us. Then, of course, over all of the individual contractors, they put in another project manager. There's another layer of overhead. There's another profit. And all of a sudden, of course, it all gets really expensive. So, we've decided to not go about it like that. Anyway, guys, unless there's any other questions, I'm finished. We're going to be starting a solar webinar, I would say probably in the next week. We can make you aware of it. I can see probably most of you, I can see the email is here, but if anybody wanted to take part in that, I would guess we probably do them at lunchtime, if that's what suits everybody. Otherwise, we have a lot of stuff that happens in the evenings, like this, calls with homeowners, etc. So we try to keep the evenings free where possible. Except for this one, we've been doing this for a number of months, so we're leaving it to Tuesday night at 6 o'clock. Anyway, sorry guys, I'm after dragging on longer than I intended. I hope that it's been of use to you. As I said, my name is Shane Murphy. I'm Sales Director. If you have any inquiries, feel free to drop them into us, and we'd be delighted to help out. As I say, every month we do these sit-down seminars that take kind of 2.5 to 3 hours, if we can keep it under control as regards questions, but they tend to be fairly relaxed days where we've 40 or 50 people, so not massive. Anyway, that's it, guys. I'm going to finish up with that. I hope it's been of use. Feel free to send anybody on to us for these, as I say, every week, and that's great. Have a nice evening. I'll let you off to your tea. Take care. Bye.